Have you ever heard of Baalbek? For most people, it's just an old place in Lebanon. But for those who don't know, this is where some of the largest stones used in many buildings around the world in ancient times can be found. These are blocks as heavy as 10 blue whales, and with a quick calculation, each one weighs almost 1 or 2,000 tons. And what's even more surprising is, like, how did they build structures back then using these massive stones? How were they able to lift and place these so precisely, even though there were no modern cranes or machinery back then? It may sound crazy, but the mystery here has actually been decoded. And the big question is, by whom? Who really discovered the secret of Baalbek? And that's what we're gonna find out. But before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support for our channel is a big help to us content creators. Thank you very much, and now let's begin cracking the ancient mystery of Baalbek. If there's one place in the world that historians and researchers often use as evidence that there might have been an earlier advanced civilization lost to history, it's Baalbek in Lebanon. Imagine, there's a single block of stone there, estimated to weigh 1,500 tons. To help you imagine it better, it's even heavier than 10 blue whales stacked on top of each other. And that's not all. In the very temple of Baalbek, you can see 3 gigantic limestone blocks known as the trilithon. Each one weighs approximately 900 tons. To help us understand, even the strongest cranes in our modern times can only lift about 20% of their weight. But how, thousands of years ago, did ancient people not only move these giant stones, but also lift them 23 feet in the air and place them with such precision? Measured so precisely, it's as if they used a laser measuring tool. Compared to modern engineering, the largest stone that can be lifted using today's machinery is only about 340 tons. In Baalbek, the stones are almost 4 to 5 times heavier, and their placement has millimeter-level precision. That means there's almost no space, not even a particle of dust between the stones. Even if we use equipment like those used in national aeronautics and space administration projects, such as the vehicle assembly building crane used for rockets, it still wouldn't be able to lift the blocks of Baalbek. Try to imagine how difficult it would be to move the Statue of Liberty. Then imagine that you would need to lift and erect 5 of these at the same time. That's how incredible the engineering behind it is. But here's the real mystery. The Romans, who were well known for being proud of their constructions and architecture, did not leave a single document or letter mentioning these stones. Remember, this is the same civilization that documented every aqueduct they built, as well as their Colosseum and arches in Rome. They loved boasting about their achievements. But when it comes to Baalbek, which they called Heliopolis or City of the Sun, they didn't leave any record at all about the gigantic stone foundations. This silence is alarming, because if they really were the ones who built it, why isn't there any record at all? There's only one logical question here. Maybe when the Romans arrived at the place, the stones were already there, and it's possible that they just built their temples on top of a foundation that's even older than them. It's like building a modern skyscraper on top of an ancient structure without knowing who originally built it. That's why many historians and researchers are divided in their opinions. Some say that it wasn't built by the Romans, but by an even earlier civilization that had techniques and knowledge that have been completely lost to history. That's why Baalbek is more than an archaeological site. It's among the most mysterious. This is a big debate in the fields of history and engineering. In fact, almost every aspect of Baalbek is a major challenge to what we know about ancient construction. This can't be explained by simply placing stones using wooden rollers or just simple manpower. Even modern machinery has a hard time explaining how this was accomplished. The 3 main blocks, known as the trilithon, measure 62 feet long, 14 feet high and 12 feet wide. Each one weighs from 800 tons and up. And what's even more astonishing is that they're not just simply resting on the ground. They're placed 23 feet high and joined together with almost no gaps at all. That's why even today, every engineer, historian, and archaeologist who visits still shakes their head in wonder. How could they have done this? And most of all, why did they choose stones this large? Why didn't they just use smaller and easier to carry stones? What drove them to do something that seems impossible even in our time today? Baalbek is not just a question of history. It is proof that once our ancestors did things beyond our imagination and understanding. If there is one question that keeps coming up about Baalbek, it is simple but unsettling. Who really built it? Because of the sheer size and weight of the stones used, it's no wonder that this has given rise to all sorts of theories, from legends of giants to stories about beings supposedly from another world. In ancient beliefs, it is said that Cain, the son of Adam, who was cursed by God, was the wanderer and the one who was ordered to build the temple in Baalbek. There is also a legend that Nimrod, the king associated with the Tower of Babel, used the Nephilim, or the giants mentioned in ancient scriptures, to lift and place these massive stones. For others, this is a clear indication of the presence of mysterious beings that we do not fully know. Recently, the theory with a hint of science fiction has gained popularity. This is known as the ancient alien hypothesis. According to writers like Graham Hancock and Zecharia Sitchin, it would have been impossible for ancient people to build this kind of construction using only their simple tools. So the explanation supposedly is that there was a more advanced civilization or extraterrestrial beings from space who taught or helped them. Some have even linked this to the Anunnaki from Mesopotamian mythology, gods or beings who are said to have brought knowledge to humanity. Now, if the stones are this heavy and massive, how do skeptics or scientists look at this? For them, there's no need for the imagination to fly all the way to outer space. According to archaeologists, maybe what they did was just extremely difficult, but not impossible. The Romans, for example, are known geniuses in engineering. They had cranes, pulley systems, large capstans, and wooden wheels that could lift heavy stones, even if they weren't as massive as those in Baalbek. If you look closely at the stones there, you'll see pick and chisel marks, proof that they were made by human hands. There have also been experiments conducted by so-called experimental archaeologists. They used traditional techniques and demonstrated that it's possible to move large stones using proper coordination and the organized physical strength of many people. But even so, there are still limitations. The strongest Roman crane could only lift 6 tons, while the largest stone in Baalbek weighs over 800. This is where the problem starts. The gap is just too wide for Roman technology to handle. That's why there's still room for extraordinary theories. When science doesn't fully explain something, people are more likely to believe mysterious explanations. As the philosopher Daniel Dennett said, when people lack imagination about what other people are capable of, they're more likely to cling to supernatural explanations. This is where Baalbek is. Between documented history and enduring legends, there are no detailed records from ancient times about who ordered or how the construction was organized. That silence gave space for all kinds of speculation. For some, this is proof of a lost civilization more advanced than what we know today. For others, this is clear evidence of contact with beings from outside our world. But for scientists, this is a monument to the skill and intelligence of ancient people, an extraordinary achievement that even today is still hard to understand. And perhaps that is the real mystery of Baalbek. It's not just about the stones that are hard to lift. It is a reminder of how vast the question is, and how a place can serve as both an inspiration for science and fuel for legend at the same time. Modern investigations and findings. Baalbek has long been discussed because of its gigantic stones. But with modern excavations and studies, the mystery has deepened even further. It's not just a question of how they did it, but also who built it and when it was first constructed. In 1898, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany visited the site. The simple visit of an emperor sparked the interest that led to extensive archaeological excavation. From 1899 to 1904, deeper evidence began to emerge here. They discovered traces of life in Baalbek that date back to the Neolithic period. This means that people have been living here for more than 10,000 years, long before the Romans arrived. This means that the foundation stones, and what is called the trilithon, may have already been standing there even before Rome completely conquered the area. That's why the Romans have no written records about the construction of those stones, because most likely they just found them already standing and used them as part of their temples. Decades passed, and in 2004, the German Archaeological Institute and the Lebanese University teamed up to re-examine the ancient quarries where the stones were taken from. There, they discovered pieces of Persian pottery with cuneiform writing engraved on them, dating back to the 6th to 4th century before Common Era. The question is it possible that the Persians were the ones who started these massive structures? They had the capacity to organize and build large projects, but there is no record stating that they were the ones who built Baalbek. Aside from that, no other place has been discovered that shows they were capable of moving stones as heavy as those in Baalbek. The structures they were known for, like those in Persepolis, used much smaller blocks, usually ranging from 1 to 20 tons. That's far from the over 1,000 tons weight of the stones in Baalbek. So the question remains, if not the Persians, then who? Another important discovery was when Margaret Vaness, a German researcher, studied how the gigantic stones were cut. She noticed that the ancient builders used the natural fissures of the stone to cut it more easily. The technique was very clever. They were able to cut huge blocks without damaging them. Remarkably, this technique also appears in other Roman projects, such as France's Pont du Gard aqueduct. But the mystery doesn't end here. On the very floor of Baalbek, blueprints were found carved directly into the stone. Imagine that, floor plans and designs actually carved into the temple floor. According to German excavations in the early 1900s, these are detailed plans of the hexagonal courtyard, almost like engineering drawings with exact measurements. This proves that it wasn't just skilled masons who built this, but true master planners with a systematic process. And here's what will surprise you the most. When Podium 1, the foundation supporting the 6 giant pillars, was studied, it was discovered that its design and construction method are almost exactly the same as Herodian architecture. The style of placing the stones is the same, the pattern of the margins is the same, and even the height of each layer of stone matches. The similarity is so specific that it's hard to say it's just a coincidence. All of this adds to the complex picture of Baalbek. From the Neolithic period, through the Persians to the Romans and Herodians, it seems that every civilization made a contribution, but there is no clear answer as to who really built the giant structures with no foundation. So now, more than a century since the modern investigation began, the same question still remains. Who had the ability to lift and stack stones that are almost impossible to carry? And why did they do it? Baalbek in different civilizations. In 1984, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization officially recognized Baalbek as a World Heritage Site. Since then, it has become a symbol of the unparalleled value of ancient engineering and human history. But the truth is, for thousands of years, it has been admired and valued by different civilizations. The history of Baalbek goes back more than 11,000 years. This means that even before the pyramids of Egypt were built, there were already people living in that area. The first settlements during the Neolithic period chose that high hill as their home, perhaps because of the natural spring around it. an abundant source of water believed to be sacred, and the origin of its name, Baalneb, which means Lord of the Spring. By 3200 before Common Era, the Phoenicians arrived. Under their rule, the place became a sanctuary. They built large temples for Kinabal-Hadad, the god of the sky and fertility, and Atargatis, the goddess of love and motherhood. Travelers from different parts of the ancient world would go there to offer sacrifices and pray. Underneath the Roman temple of Jupiter, there are still remnants of the Phoenicians in that temple, proof of their sacred influence. But this is where a bigger mystery began to emerge. Some scholars believe that the gigantic stones that make up the Trilithon and the western wall of the site may date back to the time of the Phoenicians. If this is true, it means it was 5,000 years ago. There were already people moving and stacking stones weighing more than 1,000 tons, a feat that's still hard to explain even in modern times. By 334 before Common Era, Alexander the Great arrived and included Baalbek in his territory. He changed its name to Heliopolis, or City of the Sun, and gave the place a new meaning as a center of power and religion. But the most dramatic change came with the Romans. It was first conquered by Pompey the Great in 64 before Common Era, followed by Julius Caesar in 47 before Common Era, until Emperor Augustus officially made Baalbek a colony in 16 before Common Era. Under Rome, they expanded the temple, merged their god Jupiter with the local god Baal to create the god they called Jupiter Baal. Here, the massive temple of Jupiter was built, followed by the temple of Bacchus commissioned by Emperor Antoninus Pius, and the temple of Venus constructed by the Severan dynasty in the 3rd century Common Era. At the height of its time, you could see columns reaching up to the sky, floors sparkling in the sunlight, and thousands of devotees flocking in. Back then, Baalbek seemed like the center of the spiritual universe. But when Christianity arrived, everything changed. When Emperor Constantine converted at the start of the 4th century AD, construction stopped. Emperor Theodosius was stricter. The altars of the pagan gods were destroyed and the temples were turned into churches. The Temple of Venus became a chapel, and the hexagonal courtyard was turned into a church. Even Emperor Justinian ordered the removal of the 8 giant pillars of the Temple of Jupiter and had them brought to Constantinople to decorate the Hagia Sophia. In 637, it was conquered by the Muslims. The temples were turned into a fortress called Kalat Baalbek, or Castle of Baalbek, and from then on, successive dynasties, the Umayyad, Abbasid, Fatimid, and Ayyubid, added their own structures, towers, walls, and new buildings. It gradually became a layered cake of the area's history, where each civilization left its mark. But despite all these changes, the very foundation of it all remains a mystery. Who was the first to build those gigantic stones? No civilization, not the Phoenicians, Greeks, Romans, or Muslims, ever claimed that they were the ones who raised and stacked those almost impossible to lift stones. Baalbek, then, is like a stage that has been used for thousands of years by different kingdoms, emperors, and religions. But the true architect of those foundations remains a mystery. How were they able to move those gigantic stones? If there's one question that has repeatedly troubled historians and engineers, it's a simple question, but very difficult to answer. How did ancient people move stones that weighed so much? The earliest theory that's often mentioned is the use of wooden rollers and ramps. On paper, it seems logical. Place the stone on top of logs so it can roll, while hundreds of workers pull or push it. In theory, this would reduce friction and make it easier to move. But when modern experiments tried this, it immediately resulted in failure. A well-known example is Richard Atkinson, an archaeologist who tried to move a replica of a Stonehenge bluestone, a smaller stone compared to those in Baalbek. But as soon as they tried to push it up, it suddenly slipped, and the whole operation almost failed. In other attempts, some replicas of the statue rolled away and shattered on the ground. If the smaller stones were almost impossible to control, how much more the gigantic blocks of Baalbek that are hundreds of times heavier? This is where the theory about Roman engineering comes in. There's no doubt the Romans were excellent at creating machinery. They used cranes with pulley systems, winches, and tread wheels that could lift stones weighing several tons. In projects like aqueducts and amphitheaters, they proved their intelligence and discipline in construction. There are even drawings and documents that describe their machinery, such as the trispastos, pentaspastos, and polythene. Cranes that are finely and expertly designed, but no matter how good they were, the limitations were clear. Even the most modern Roman crane could only lift up to 6 tons, while the stones in Baalbek weigh between 8 and 1,000 tons. The difference is overwhelming. Even if you combine 10 or 20 cranes, it's hard to imagine how they could move a block as heavy as a jumbo jet and then lift it 20 feet and 3 feet high. Some suggest some stones may have been made directly on site. In other words, maybe they weren't transported from a distant place, but were just shaped right where they are now. That's possible, but it still doesn't explain the exact placement and perfect fit of the stones. It's like everything was meticulously planned before construction even started. There are also theories about the capstan system, large wooden screws or posts that are turned by people or animals to generate a tremendous pulling force. But even according to the calculations of modern engineers, this still isn't enough to move stones this large, especially on rocky ground and up an inclined ramp. That's why until now it remains a mystery. The experiments and theories are all lacking, raising more questions than answers. The Romans, who were known for documenting almost all of their projects, did not even mention the trilithon or these stones. Their silence seems like a deliberate concealment, or maybe it's just a simple truth. They really weren't the ones who built it. That's why some say that maybe there was an earlier civilization before the Romans arrived. A culture that was able to build structures that others couldn't. If there really was lost knowledge or technology, Baalbek is one of the biggest proofs of it. At this point, the question is not just how they did it, but why did they choose to do it that way? Why did they have to use such massive stones when they could have used smaller and easier to move ones? What is the reason behind this decision that seems to go beyond the logic of practical construction? This is where Baalbek's mystery deepens again, a puzzle that remains unanswered to this day. But it continues to amaze and puzzle both experts and ordinary people.